Arthur Grumiaux, Mr. Purity, the aristocratic violinist, the master of Cantabile. Now, some violinists are born geniuses. We might cite the examples of Paganini, Menuhin and Heifetz. They often have perfect pitch, and as children play way better than adult professionals of their time in both technique and interpretation. They are born geniuses, so they have a natural head start in their DNA. Some get to the top though through sheer hard work combined with natural talent. And we could cite as examples of that Isaac Stern, Itzhak Perlman, and the subject of this video today, Arthur Grumiaux. As far as I can tell, Jascha Heifetz, the born genius, had a very high regard for Arthur Grumiaux, the talented grafter. Few violinists have made the art of violin playing appear as effortless as Arthur Grumiaux did. One was Nathan Milstein, who Grumiaux happened to be a big fan of. But to play in an effortless way, like the swan, graceful on the surface, paddling frantically beneath the surface, this is really testimony to the sheer hard work that Arthur Grumiaux put in, and we'll see that as we go through this video. Now, Arthur Grumiaux was a Belgian violinist considered by some to have been one of the few truly great violin virtuosi of the 20th century. I can say for myself that Grumiaux happens to be one of my favourite violinists. He had a beautiful tone and flawless intonation, and he lived between 1921 and 1986, very much a 20th century man. He had humble beginnings. He was born to a working class family in the Belgian town of Villers-Peauwen in the Walloon province of Brabant in Belgium on the 21st of March 1921. Grumiaux was only 3 years old when his grandfather urged him to begin music studies. Indeed, he was reared by his maternal grandparents from infancy and introduced to music by his grandfather, who ran a small music sheet store. When he was given this tiny violin at about age 3.5, he displayed perfect pitch from the start. Now that is a genetic thing and is quite a fascinating thing as well. He was taught by his grandfather at first. He gave his first public appearance at age 5, and at the conclusion of the public appearance, the young 5-year-old bade the audience to stand while he played the national anthem. In 1927, he entered the Conservatoire in Charleroi. The instruction he received there was not necessarily very highly regarded, but nevertheless it was a conservatoire which he entered at the age of 6. When the normal entry age was 11, he was initially refused entry due to his age, but after an audition he was then accepted immediately. So definitely a child prodigy. And he spent the next 5 years commuting to Charleroi by train, accompanied by his grandmother, who would knit in the grand hall while the boy practiced. So this is what we mean by sheer hard work. Commuting from the age of 5 by train. And it's only going to intensify as his musical studies continue, as we'll see. He left Charleroi with the Premier Prix in both violin and piano, so an accomplished pianist as well as a violinist, and studied violin and piano there until the age of 11, when he graduated and moved on to the Royal Conservatoire in Brussels to study violin. In Brussels, he studied principally with Alfred Dubois, who himself was a pupil of Eugene Issai, but he also studied with Fernand Quinet for a while. At this point, Grumiaux had now reached the stage where he was forced to choose between the violin and the piano. Heifetz had faced a similar choice years earlier, and it had almost swung in favour of the piano in Heifetz's case too. We can be very grateful that Heifetz ultimately chose the violin, and similarly with Grumiaux. who wished to continue with both, but in the end was persuaded by the Conservatoire director, M. Henri, to choose the violin. And aren't we glad that he did? Now, a huge commitment was demanded of Grumiaux, and he led an arduous life in his younger years. He had to rise at 5 a.m. to travel to Brussels for lessons and return at 6 p.m. to go to evening classes in Charleroi. This is sheer hard work. And Dubois often took the boy to his house for additional lessons there. So it's no surprise then, given his natural talent and the work ethic that he put in, that at age 11 Grumiaux won the Premier Prix with distinction at the Brussels Royal Conservatory. Age 11. By age 18, Dubois said there was nothing more he could teach him and suggested that he go to Paris to study with Anescu, with whom he spent one season, it seems. And it was George Anescu who revealed to Grumiaux that, to quote, "indispensable serenity is an integral part of the works of the great composers." Indispensable serenity. Serenity is certainly a quality that Grumiaux would exude himself. He returned to Brussels and was appointed assistant to Dubois, and years later, upon Dubois' death in 1949, he was invited to replace his teacher as professor in the conservatory. In 1939, Arthur Grumiaux won the Violins competition. In June 1939, Grumiaux made his debut with the Brussels Philharmonic Orchestra, performing the Mendelssohn Concerto in E minor with conductor Charles Munch. And he was awarded the Special Prize for Virtuosity in that year as well, conferred by the Belgian government, and he then prepared for an international career. He actually became the first recipient of the Belgian government's Prix de Virtuosité, Special Prize for Virtuosity. But then in 1940 the Nazis invaded. They offered him a position as concertmaster of a leading German symphony orchestra, thus providing escape from forced labour in a war factory. But he did not wish to serve the German masters, and so went into hiding, avoiding detection until the end of the war and managing to keep his skills intact. Due to the German invasion of his homeland and the fact that he was in hiding, his next opportunity to play publicly came after liberation in 1945 with the Allied Military Entertainment Organisation, making his London debut later that year. After the war, he gained international recognition, performing with major orchestras in Europe and the United States. As mentioned, he was appointed professor of violin at the Brussels Conservatoire in 1949, and Walter Legger, director of HMV Records, offered him a major tour encompassing England, Belgium and the Netherlands, plus a series of 5 recordings. The Strad magazine describes the support of Legger as being generous support of a legendary record producer, and thus Grumiaux went on to make his first recordings and rapidly establish his international reputation. He debuted in the United States in Boston around 1952 and then toured the United States in the following year. In 1973, he was created a baron by King Baudouin of Belgium for his services to music. Now let's look at the lineage of Belgian violinists of the French-Belgian school, of the so-called French-Belgian school that Grumiaux became heir to. Charles de Berriot, 1802 to 1870, Henri Vieuxtemps, 1820 to 1881, Lambert Massart, 1811-1892, François Prume, 1816-1849, Hubert Léonard, 1819 to 1890, Ovid Musin, 1854 to 1929, César Thompson, 1857 to 1931, the renowned Eugène Issai, 1858 to 1931. This Belgian-French school had influenced other national schools, and the undisputed heir to this noble tradition was none other than Arthur Grumiaux, according to Henry Roth. Despite this violinistic heritage, he was very much a 20th century artist. The term Mr. Purity springs to mind. A purity that communicated a rare nobility of spirit, tasteful musicality, and sincerity of purpose, swathed in vibrant tonal beauty and delivered with impeccable technique. Quoting the words of writer Henry Roth, he just has a way of stringing words together, that guy, in a beautiful way. But it aptly described Arthur Grumiaux. Gifted Romanian pianist Dinu Lipati was especially eager to form a duo with Grumiaux, but plans to perform and record some of the staple classics of the repertoire sadly came to nothing due to Lipati's tragically early death in 1950 at the age of 33. Ultimately, it would be Clara Haskell who would be the key piano accompanist for Arthur Grumiaux. We mentioned that he was a highly proficient pianist, just like Heifetz, Anescu and Kreisler before him. And indeed, in 1957, he actually recorded the Brahms Sonata No. 2 and the Mozart Sonata, Köchel 481, in a self-duo, playing both instruments. Did Arthur Grumiaux marry? At first I struggled to answer that, and I thought maybe he had remained unmarried throughout his life, but it appears that he did actually marry a woman called Amanda Georgina Lillian Webb, who, as far as I can tell, was born in Perth, Australia in 1903, so quite a bit older than her husband Arthur Grumiaux. And it seems like she passed away in 2000 at the ripe old age of 96 years, so outliving Grumiaux by some 14 years. And it looks like they were actually married on November the 29th, 1951, a Thursday to be precise, in St. Genesius Road, Brabant, Belgium. And I have Arthur Grumiaux's full name here as Arthur Alex Ghislain Grumiaux. And also I've got a note of his parents, Jean-Baptiste Armand Joseph Grumiaux, who died in 1954, and Marie-Ghislaine Fichefet, who died in 1980. But as I mentioned, he was raised by his grandparents. I don't know how close a connection he had to his actual parents. Let's talk a little about Grumiaux's style of playing. He viewed the violin as the instrument of song, possessed a vibrato capable of exceptionally rapid velocity and evenness, but meticulously controlled to the dictates of the music style and mood. Remember that we likened him to an aristocratic player at the outset of the video, and these descriptions are reinforcing that thought there. He was described as never wasting a note and having a tone that flowed like a refreshing mountain stream, gratifying to the ear. Quoting Henry Roth again. In character, it is a ravishing soprano, has the elegance of a consummate gentleman, an aristocrat, shall we say. His slides were employed with subtlety and regal taste, innate musicality. Perhaps this is what we mean by aristocratic playing, crystalline in sound, angelic in style, and technically precise. And Grumiaux is said to have much admired Nathan Milstein, as mentioned. Not only Milstein, but also he was a great admirer of Mischa Elman, who we know had a wonderful tone. Quoting the Strad magazine, the flowing elegance of his bow strokes and his supreme left-hand precision combined to create the epitome of a classical violinist. His impact on modern concepts of interpretative purity was incalculable. Grumiaux's playing exhibited an unmistakably French fastidiousness and poise, coupled with an inner vibrancy and warmth that is more typically Belgian. French fastidious and poise, Belgian inner vibrancy and warmth. His unalloyed purity of tone, technique and interpretative vision, combined with a profound gift for natural phrasing, resulted in performances that possessed an extraordinary sense of oneness and inevitability. My personal favourite recordings of Grumiaux, because he was quite a prolific recording artist for Philips, my personal favourites would be probably the Beethoven Concerto, anything by Mozart and Bach. His Bach playing is described as being with live and brilliant vibrato. Large numbers of music lovers consider his Mozart to be the ne plus ultra of the genre. Apparently he wrote his own cadenzas for the Mozart No. 4. So excellent at interpreting the classics, shall we say. The Brahms concerto, as performed by Grumiaux, is described by Roth as technically immaculate and uniformly beautiful. He was also an outstanding purveyor of short vignettes and delved into chamber music as well. He performed and recorded the complete Beethoven violin sonatas with pianist Clara Haskell and the string trios with his own ensemble. Indeed, he had established his own quartet, the Grumiaux Trio, and was a frequent chamber music performer, similar to Heifetz. Grumiaux's unfussy stage presence was completely free of physical affectation, so old school in that sense. Indeed, few players have made playing the violin look so deceptively easy. Again, the Swan, graceful on the surface, paddling frantically beneath the surface. He was grace personified. His lifted bow strokes were invariably kept very close to the string, and apart from some flexibility in his index finger when changing bows at the heel, his full-flowing bow action was achieved with supreme nonchalance, to quote the Strad magazine on his style of playing and technique. He was a master of Cantabile, with portamentos kept to a bare minimum. Grumiaux's tone possessed an outward radiance that was focused by a lustrous inner core. In his hands, firm opulence and ethereal purity combined to tantalizing effect. The Strad also delves into his strengths and weaknesses. Weaknesses, I don't think he had many, but it discusses that nevertheless. Strengths, Grumiaux's ability to get to the heart of every score he played with the minimum of physical and interpretative distraction was especially alluring in the Baroque and classical repertoires. For many, his Bach and Mozart remain pinnacles of musical perfection unsurpassed by any other player. Wow, what an accolade. And weaknesses, Grumiaux could appear emotionally ungiving in music of heightened expressive rightness, such as Bruck's Scottish Fantasy and Chausson's poem. This is where he would be superseded by players like Heifetz, Itzhak Perlman. His Brahms and Tchaikovsky concertos were altogether more successful, even if the former is rather low on Germanic cut and thrust, and the latter lacks Slavic intensity. So you can't be brilliant at everything, no violinist is. Every violinist has some weaknesses, although with some it's very difficult to uncover at times. And on his recordings, he had a long-standing relationship with Philips Records, lasting more than 20 years, and recordings are available from them of him performing works by Handel, Bach, Vivaldi, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Mendelssohn, Bruck, Tchaikovsky, Saint-Saëns, Lalo, Wieniawski, and Johann Svensson, a wide-ranging, comprehensive, extensive recording catalogue. His vast repertoire ranged from the sonatas of Vivaldi and Nardini to concertos of Berg, Stravinsky and Bartók, the full spectrum then of Baroque to modern, via classical and romantic. Paganini, transcription gems by Kreisler and Heifetz, you name it, he played all of it. Although he played relatively little 20th century music, Grumiaux was an early champion of the Walton Concerto. He also gave the first modern performance of the reconstructed Fourth Concerto of Paganini in 1954, after the manuscript of the work had been rediscovered. So interestingly, just like Henrik Schering was key in reviving the Paganini Concerto 3, Grumiaux was involved in the Paganini 4. I must say, I do like Grumiaux's Paganini a lot. I would add that to a list of my favourite recordings of his, I would say. And here are some recommended recordings as suggested by the Strad magazine. Sadly, he died relatively young at the age of 65 of a sudden stroke in Brussels, Belgium on October the 16th, 1986. He is remembered as one of the finest violin virtuosi of the 20th century. What's the legacy of Arthur Grumiaux? Well, there is an international violin competition held annually that takes place at the Royal Conservatory of Brussels in Belgium, and named in his honour as the Concours International Arthur Grumiaux pour jeunes violonistes, translated as the International Arthur Grumiaux Competition for Young Violinists. And that's held every year at the Royal Conservatory of Brussels in Belgium. He was awarded the title of Baron by the Belgian government in 1973, further reinforcing his aristocratic violinistic status. A literal aristocrat. His recordings continue to be very highly regarded. And he's remembered for his refined elegance, technical mastery, and musical intelligence. And his influence on violin playing and interpretation remains significant. Let's talk a little bit about the violins of Arthur Grumiaux. He owned a Guarneri, the Rose, made by Giuseppe Guarneri in 1744. Grumiaux owned two Stradivari violins, the General Dupont 1727 and the Titian of 1715. He also owned the Museum Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, made in 1739. He performed on two Stradivari instruments, one of which was the Titian, but preferred the sonority of a Del Gesù. Like Heifetz, like Kogan, he was a Del Gesù player. Ricci, all Del Gesù players. After he obtained his marvellous 1744 Del Gesù, he played on that one until his death. His favourite instrument, and the one he regularly performed on up until the time of his death, was the Rose Guarneri del Gesù of 1744. Grumiaux also owned three Guardaninis, including the 1773 Campoli and an 1866 Viol. He owned a wide collection of bows, although his firm favourite was a Dominique Picquet. What have others said about Grumiaux? Edward Greenfield wrote of him that he was a master virtuoso who consistently refused to make a show of his technical prowess, and Henry Roth ranks him among the most distinguished string artists of the 20th century. His grandfather introduced him to the concert stage at age 5, thus precipitating a long and illustrious career. So a quick recap of the chronology. 1921, born in Villers-Perwin, Belgium. 1925, begins his first violin lessons. 1932, wins first prize at the Charleroi Conservatoire. 1939, wins the Henri Vieuxtemps Prize and studies with Dubois and Anescu in Paris. 1945, makes his British debut. 1949, appointed professor of violin at the Royal Conservatoire of Brussels. 1951, makes his US debut in Boston. 1973, made a baron by Belgium's King Baudouin. And 1986, dies in Brussels of a stroke, aged 65. So that was the life of the great Arthur Grumiaux.